I welcome you back once again to the Hindu Newspaper Analysis. There were some technical issues, but we have fixed it finally and we are back live. I hope all of you can see me and can hear me properly now. This is time once again to begin analyzing today's Hindu newspaper. These are the important articles that we will be discussing from the Hindu newspaper today. There are 4 topics on the mains examination point of view. The first article again is based on the Supreme Court judgments recently in Delhi and Maharashtra. But this article talks about how these 2 judgments are contrary to each other. Second topic we'll be discussing is on the concept of palliative care. What exactly do you mean by palliative care? How does it work? And why Kerala is the only state that is doing well in palliative care. Then the third topic that we have is about China and Canada. How China and Canada are not really having the best of relationship. Both the countries have even fired each other's diplomats. So we'll be discussing what that issue is all about. Then we'll be discussing how the RBI has been asking the banks to move away from LIBOR, L-I-B-O-R. We'll be discussing what exactly do we mean by LIBOR and why do we feel the need to move away from this concept. Then from prelims examination point of view, we'll be discussing that first. Cabinet has given approval to fertilizer subsidy for the kharif season, and then the climate threshold, that is a threshold of 2 degrees Celsius, may be breached in the next 5 years. These are the important articles that we have taken up from the Hindu newspaper. So let's not delay any further. Let's begin with the first topic. The first topic that we have here is again based on the recent Supreme Court judgments. The 2 important judgments that we have discussed separately. The judgment in case of Delhi and the judgment in case of what happened in Maharashtra. I will just remind you very quickly the basic outcome of the 2 judgments. In the Maharashtra judgment, and we have discussed both of these earlier as well. In the Maharashtra judgment, the Supreme Court said that if there is a division between legislative party, that is the party's MPs or MLAs, or the political party. In case of Maharashtra, Supreme Court had said that when there is a division, there are 2 different groups and parties, legislative parties, that is MPs, MLAs of that party, and the political party. When these 2 different groups are formed, the Supreme Court had given more importance to political party. Remember, we had discussed about the question of whip also. Which of these 2 would appoint the whip? Which of these 2 actually would ensure that whip has to be adhered by all the members of the political party? Now, if you remember, we had discussed the Supreme Court of India had said that whip would be appointed by the political party and not by the legislative party. In simple terms, in case of Maharashtra, Supreme Court gave preference to political party over legislative party. That is what the author is saying. That in the Shiv Sena verdict, the Supreme Court in simple terms gave more preference to the political party, that whatever the political party decides, that is more important as compared to the legislative party. Legislative party means the MPs, MLAs that have been elected from the party ticket. On the other hand, what has happened in Delhi? On the other hand, in case of Delhi, if you see, the opposite has happened. In case of Delhi, what has the Supreme Court said? In case of Delhi, Supreme Court has said that the legislative government or the legislative party, the people who are in power, those who have been democratically elected, they should be the one that should control services. So on one hand, in Maharashtra, the preference has been given to the political party over the elected members of the assembly. On the other hand, in Delhi, the elected members of the assembly, the people who have won the elections, they have been given the priority, and the Supreme Court has said that in Delhi, the power to decide on the services, the power to decide who exactly would be transferred where, who exactly will be posted where, that power in case of Delhi has been given to the legislative party, to the people who have been elected in the legislature. So in short, what has happened is, in this case, the author is saying that the Supreme Court itself has given contradictory judgments. In one state, they are saying that political party is more important, legislative party, whatever they demand, whatever they want doesn't really matter. In case of Delhi, they have said that the legislative party matters more. This is the big contradiction. The author here is also talking about the 10th schedule of the Indian Constitution. As we know, 10th schedule of the Indian Constitution talks about the anti-defection law. The anti-defection law was a matter of big discussion in Maharashtra because both the sides wanted to disqualify the other side's MLAs. Both the sides wanted to say that the other side's MLA should be disqualified because they have changed their party. In this case also, the Supreme Court reiterated the fact that we will not take the final decision, or we will not take the decision whether a member of parliament will be disqualified or not under anti-defection law. What did the Supreme Court say? Supreme Court said that the decision about disqualification on anti-defection law will be taken by the speaker. We will not interfere. But yes, after the speaker has taken the decision, then you can come and challenge in the Supreme Court. Let me repeat what happened. The Supreme Court very clearly said, in anti-defection law, the decision to disqualify will be taken by the speaker only. We will not interfere before the speaker takes a decision. The Supreme Court said, we will only interfere, or we will only give a judgment once the speaker has already decided whatever they have to decide. If the decision of the speaker is against the law, then we will interfere, but we will not stop the speaker from taking the decision. There is one more problem with anti-defection law, as you know. The problem is that there is no time limit. There is no time limit within which the presiding officer has to take the decision. For example, if you actually see what the speaker does in Lok Sabha or in the Legislative Assembly, the speakers, because they have the power to take the decision when someone changes the side, they usually take a lot of time because there is no specific time limit. Now, let's just take a very simple example. Let's take an example of the parliament today. Now, in parliament today, the BJP is in majority, the BJP is in power. So let's assume if one of the members of the Congress, or if anyone in the parliament wants to change their party today, everyone would want to change their party to go towards the winning side, right? For example, today, do you think there will be any BJP member of parliament who will say, no, I want to go to Congress? No, they will not do that. Obviously, when you talk about changing sides, people change side to come towards the side that is in power, right? Now, let's take this example. Let's say that the Indian National Congress member of parliament jumps ship and goes to the BJP. So, under anti-defection law, the person should be disqualified. But who will take the disqualification decision? The Lok Sabha speaker. Now, the Lok Sabha speaker belonged to which political party? The Lok Sabha speaker, Shri Om Birla, belonged to the BJP only. So, would the Lok Sabha speaker want to take a decision to disqualify a member who has come to their own party? Just try and understand this. Would the Lok Sabha speaker take a decision to disqualify someone who has joined their own party? They would not take that, because at the end of the day, they would want to support their own party. This is where the problem starts. Since the anti-defection law, first of all, gives so much powers in the hands of the speaker or the presiding officer, number one. Second problem, the anti-defection law does not put any time limit within which the speaker has to take a call. This is why the anti-defection law needs to change. And if that would have been the case, maybe decision of Maharashtra also would have been different. Now, the author here is saying that there are certain changes that we need to make. Changes, for example, mainly in the anti-defection law. As you know, anti-defection law was introduced when we saw this problem that legislators were changing their parties time and time again. The legislators, the MPs, the MLAs used to go towards the other side in exchange of money, and that led to a lot of instability. Apart from that, again, the problem is, since the speaker has the power to take the decision, and the speaker, in most cases, obviously, would belong to the ruling party only, you expect the speaker to act as neutral, but it is not really the case. You all know this. You may expect the speaker to be neutral, but the speaker belongs to one political party. So they may act or they may say we are acting neutral, but that is not usually the case. And this is why there is a need to make these changes. There is one more thing. Let's try and understand this. See, When anti-defection law was introduced, it was introduced so that people don't change side just for the sake of money or power. That was the entire idea. That MPs or MLAs should not go to the other side just because they get money or power. But what we did not realize was bringing anti-defection law may also go against the common public. I'll give you a simple example. Let's assume that in your constituency, your candidate in election campaigning had promised you that vote for me, I will make sure the next government hospital is built here. Okay? Let's assume that the candidate, while contesting election in your city, promised you, vote for me, I'll build the government hospital here. Now you elected him, he went to power. Now what happens? His government, who has come to power, is not building the hospital here. But even then, he cannot go against his own government because it would be anti-defection law. In reality, as per the author, the real anti-defection law should have been that if MPs or MLAs go against their own voters, if they had promised something to their voters and they go against that, that should be ideally the anti-defection law. Right now, the anti-defection law is that you have to be loyal to your political party, but that should not be the case. The loyalty of a legislator, be it the MP or the MLA, should not be towards their political party. They should rather be towards their own voters, the people who have voted for them, the people to whom they made the promises. This is a big change that we require in the anti-defection law. Now, I'm really sure that all of you by now have done all your research about the anti-defection law. You know it many times. You have also read this in Indian polity. But just to remind you, anti-defection law was introduced as an amendment in the Constitution as a part of the 10th schedule. The anti-defection law gives the powers to the Speaker of the Lok Sabha or the Rajya Sabha chairperson to take the decision on disqualification. When it was first introduced, the anti-defection law, the law had said that the decision of the presiding officer cannot be challenged in the Supreme Court. Please remember, when it was first introduced, the decision was that the law cannot be challenged, or the decision of the Speaker cannot be challenged in the Supreme Court. But then Supreme Court in 1992, in the famous Kehoto-Holohan case of 1992, the Supreme Court said that if the Speaker's decision is actually unconstitutional, we will take it away. The Supreme Court had said that Speaker's decision can be challenged. If the Speaker's decision is on malified grounds, if the Speaker is being biased, then the decision can be challenged. However, on the other hand, the court also said that we cannot take away the powers of the Speaker or the presiding officer. They will decide who to disqualify, who not to disqualify. Only after the Speaker has taken the decision, only after that the Supreme Court will decide whether they want to intervene or not. But before the Speaker's decision, they will not intervene. As I said, anti-defection law does not have a time limit. There have been multiple issues because what has happened is people who have changed their parties and who have come to the ruling party side, they have not been disqualified for a long time. Not just this, many of them are even made ministers. Don't even or forget about disqualification. The people who actually come towards the other side are even made ministers and the speakers don't even take a decision. All of that because the law does not give any time limit. But the Supreme Court has said that we will not interfere with the time limit. Supreme Court has said that speakers should take decision within a reasonable time limit. Now, what is the reasonable time limit? They have not clarified this. Supreme Court will only interfere if the decision has been taken and after that it seems to be unconstitutional. This was our first article about what happened as per the Supreme Court. Before going to the second one, let me take up a few questions. Is presiding officer sole authority for deciding anti-defection law? Yes, they are the sole authority. Can speaker be removed by Supreme Court for making biased decision? No, speaker will not be removed. Speaker's decision will be taken back. It's not that speaker will be removed. There is a separate method for removal of the speaker. The chats are running away at a very fast pace. I'll go slightly up. Yeah, I'll take one more question. Can the Supreme Court fix the date of appointment of judges using Article 142? See, the simple logic is the Supreme Court can do anything under Article 142. Will they or will they not? It depends on them. They know how to use the power of 142. Then Sunny is saying, I have a confusion in information of oath subscribed by MP. I would really advise you to have questions related to what we discussed and not your generic polity questions, because that will take a lot of time. But I'll still take this one. In affirmation and oath which subscribed by MP Lakshmikant, there is mentioned in two places. One says MP will subscribe the oath by person authorized by Election Commission. So basically what happens is, when you are fighting the elections, let's say you want to fight Lok Sabha elections, you submit your form. In your form also, while submitting your form, you have to take the oath as a candidate also. That oath is given by the officer who is responsible, who has been made responsible by the Election Commission for submission of all those forms. Usually it is the DM. That is called the returning officer. And then once you become a member of parliament, you again take an oath that is administered by the leader of the parliament. Then how many times a new government can be called with the same MLAs without decision? I am not sure what your question is. Not sure what your question is. Ashu is saying, do you think about principle of accountability because it is fundamental aspect of democracy and cornerstone of ethical behavior? See, Ashu, there is no one in the world that will say that transparency is bad. There is no one in the world that would say accountability is bad. So the question is not whether accountability or principle of accountability should be held or not. Everyone will say it should be held. But the question is how and what exactly would you do to implement that? So there is no question about the fact that principle of accountability should be maintained. But how and at what cost, that is what the question is. Okay. Then I think in anti-defection law there should be 6 months for re-election. No. We are not talking about the time limit for re-election. We are talking about the time limit within which the speaker has to take a decision. For that there is no time limit. Let's go ahead then. The next article we want to discuss is about something called palliative care. Now what exactly is palliative care? Let's try and understand this. In simple terms, if a person is suffering from a life-threatening disease, life-threatening disease, for example, maybe let's say cancer. That kind of a person who is suffering from a life-threatening disease, he or she is very ill, they can't really move at many places. Taking care of them is called as palliative care. So palliative care means taking care in case of, as I said, life-threatening diseases. When there are life-threatening diseases, that is when the palliative care actually comes into the picture. Now, as per the author here, there is no state as such in India that is taking care of palliative cares in a way that Kerala is doing. Kerala is probably the only state that has a proper policy also for palliative care patients about how the government of Kerala should invest in palliative care. Central government also does have a policy, but at the state government level, most of the states have not really implemented this. Palliative care, as I said, is to improve the quality of life of those patients who are suffering from life-threatening illnesses, cancer, cardiovascular diseases, all these kind of diseases that can be a major threat to your life. Now, if you look at the situation in these, especially in the developing world, these kind of diseases are extremely hard, especially on the lower income population. So people anyways who are from lower middle income countries, people who are from those places where sanitation, etc. is not given top priority, hygienic conditions are not really found, those are the main areas where these kind of problems really exist. Kerala has seen a good beginning in this regard. Kerala government launched a palliative care policy in 2008, where all the 14 districts of Kerala have infrastructure for palliative care. While other states in India do not have that, Kerala is the only one that has introduced this structure. Now, the problem with healthcare in India is, and we have discussed this earlier as well, healthcare is a sector that usually should have much more investment from the government. But because of the lower revenue of the government than what is ideal, because of lower tax collection from the side of the governments don't really have enough options to actually invest in palliative care. Kerala seems to be an exception in this case. Kerala has a network of 841 of India's 908 palliative care sites. Just imagine, out of the total 908 palliative care sites of India, 841 are just in Kerala. One other thing that Kerala has done very well is, after the COVID-19 crisis was faced by the entire country, most of the states were focusing only on physical health. Most states were not focusing on mental health except Kerala. Kerala was actually focusing a lot on mental health also after COVID-19. They had made sure that their palliative care infrastructure, where the patients are given treatment, are given counseling, are given all the psychological support that they require, all of that introduced good results. And that is why, even if you see overall numbers today, the number of people affected by COVID in Kerala as compared to other states, Kerala did much, much better as compared to other. Now, the situation is usually the same around the world, mostly in developing countries. Only 14% of patients who need palliative care actually get it. So the situation is very bad, not just in India, but around the world, especially in developing countries. In Kerala, it covers, or they cover, more than 60% of the patients. So this is one thing that Kerala has gotten right. Rather than ignoring these patients, they have made sure that they set up enough infrastructure for that. Secondly, the public health palliative care myth is also about the fact that it's not that state governments cannot deliver such an infrastructure. Kerala was able to deliver this infrastructure. That proves the fact that if Kerala can do this, the other states can also do this. So if Kerala model, in this case, is being followed, it can be followed by other states as well. This is what Kerala has been doing in this case. Now, I also wanted to tell you, it's not that Kerala alone has this policy. At the national government level as well, we have something called the National Program for Palliative Care. So at the center government level, we do have the National Program for Palliative Care. This, as I said, is a program that has been launched by the Government of India in 2012. This is to build infrastructure and take care of those patients who are suffering from life-threatening diseases such as AIDS, cancer, etc. This is aimed at improving the quality of life of the patients who are suffering from life-threatening diseases, making sure that their diagnosis, etc. is given top priority, and not just this, also taking care of the family members. See, when you are dealing with a person who is suffering from a major disease, it's not that you only have to take care of that person. The people in the family are also suffering because they also have to disrupt their timetable. They also have to maybe leave their jobs. They have to take care of that patient. So you have to take care of the family members as well. Not just this, if the person who is suffering from these diseases is the only breadwinner in the family, he is the only one who is the earning member of the family, then the responsibility is even more on the other members. So Government of India, in this policy, wanted to allocate budget, but the problem is no separate budget so far has been given to this program. Please remember, at the center government level, we do have a policy for palliative care patients, but no separate budget has been given so far for this policy. And that again brings back to the same problem. You can have as many policies as you want, but not giving any budget doesn't really change anything. Let's assume your father asks you, where do you want to go for a holiday? You can name 10 countries, I want to go here, I want to go here. And when you ask for money to book tickets, he says, no budget. Just make plans, where do you want to go? And then search the photo on Google and then just travel on Google. You can't do that, right? So just by making a policy, you can't expect a change to happen. This is the problem here as well. With palliative care also, a policy has been made, but we do not have separate budget for them. What can we do going forward? First, have many more trained professionals. See, it's not easy to take care of patients who are suffering from these diseases. So you need much better trained professionals. You need specialists who give these treatments. In a lot of these places, see, India does have a lot of doctors, but you also know many of the doctors are not really equipped with the knowledge that is required to treat these kind of diseases. So you have to ensure treatment is given by specialists. Then rehabilitate the family members, as I said, those family members who are affected by the patient's illness, they have to be taken care of, and there should be adequate budget given by the government. These are some of the things that have been suggested as a way forward. Before we go to the next article, let me quickly take up a few more questions. Is there any center government scheme related to palliative? No, Ashu. There is a policy by the center government. If there would have been a scheme, there would have been a budget, right? So, no. Sandeep is saying Kerala is doing very well in health sector. What are the major fiscal income sources of Kerala? So, Kerala has a pretty good average income. So, the people consume more things in Kerala. There is a lot of people who actually go outside the state. So, Kerala, for example, has a lot of those people who go outside Kerala and then they come back earning a lot more money. A lot of their people, a lot of residents of Kerala work in the UAE, Dubai, etc. So all of these actually come in and help them out. Then, how much fund Kerala is allocating assigned to this? The fund keeps on changing. It's not one single year, right? So every single year, whenever they give the budget, they have certain budget for this scheme as well. Shanava is saying, is the budget for scheme necessary? Without a budget, how will you run the scheme? Any scheme, even to advertise that scheme in newspaper, you have to spend money, right? So you have to have budget for any scheme. Doesn't matter how small or big. Scheme is about helping people. So how will you help people even if you don't have money? Sunny, palliative care is home service also, and it is centers also where you can go. I'll give you a simple example. Okay, let's take this example. Let's say someone is suffering from cancer. Okay, now when you're suffering from cancer, you have to go for your therapy. Okay, so if you're suffering from cancer, you go for your chemotherapy. Now the problem is not many hospitals or medical centers are actually equipped enough to provide this chemotherapy. So the cancer patient in smaller cities, in villages, for example, where will that person go? That person would have to go all the way to a big city to get a chemotherapy done, and that is done every 2 weeks or every 3 weeks. So how will the cancer patient travel? In all that illness, you are expecting the cancer patient to travel 300-400 kilometers to get chemotherapy, then come back, and after 2 weeks again then go, and then again come back. That is the problem. So if there are, let's say, these kind of healthcare centers which are nearby, you can expect the patient to get better care. That is what the idea of palliative care is. Mr. Vikram, I'm very impressed with your smileys, but I would suggest you stop using the smileys, and if you have some question, please feel free to ask those. Manoj is saying, don't we have skilled doctors in India? It's not that we don't have skilled doctors in India. We do have skilled doctors in India, but see, the kind of population that we have, population is much more as compared to the requirement of the people. Plus, as we discussed, when most of the people in India do not have any health insurance, even when they do have a doctor, they won't be able to go to that because the doctors will charge money. So again, it's not a problem of not having enough doctors. There are good doctors, but they're very expensive. And then if you are not earning that much, you will not be able to go. For example, if you talk about bigger cities, let's talk about Delhi, Bangalore, Mumbai, if these kind of cities, if you have to go to a good specialist doctor, it is very usual that you will have to charge, or you will have to give over 1,000 rupees even for one single visit. It's pretty normal now that a doctor will charge you over 1,000 rupees for one visit, and for every visit you have to shell out more. And I'm talking about the bigger cities, Delhi, Mumbai, Bangalore, etc. And the more experienced doctors charge even more than that. So again, that becomes a big problem, that there are doctors, they may not be affordable to a lot of other people. Let's go ahead then. The next article that we have here is about the problem between China and Canada. So China and Canada have a lot of issues. The most recent issue that happened was Canada dismissed a Chinese diplomat. So there was a Chinese, let's assume their version of IFS officer. The Chinese diplomat who was posted in Canada, he was dismissed. Now, why was this person dismissed? Canada dismissed the person because there were allegations that this Chinese diplomat, the Chinese diplomat that we are talking about, he was creating a lot of pressure on the leader of opposition in China. The leader of opposition lawmaker, Michael Chong, on him Chinese diplomat was creating a lot of pressure, even threatening his family that if you don't vote in favor of China, if you don't make policies in favor of China, we will do this to your family, we will do that to your family. So Chinese diplomat was charged with threatening a Canadian lawmaker and threatening the Canadian lawmaker's family. Why was that happening? Because this Canadian lawmaker that I'm talking about, this Canadian lawmaker 2 years back in 2021 supported a resolution of Canada government which said that China is not treating their Uyghur Muslims fairly. That is the story. Let me again repeat. In 2021, this lawmaker of Canada played a major role in a government resolution which said that China is not treating their Uyghur Muslims properly. Now, that lawmaker is being harassed by the Chinese diplomat, his family is being threatened, because of which Chinese diplomat has been suspended or has been asked to leave Canada. Now, China also, whenever this kind of a thing happens, China never ever accepts their mistake. China always becomes more aggressive. This is called the wolf warrior diplomacy. We have discussed about this earlier as well. There's something called wolf warrior tactic. Wolf warrior diplomacy or wolf warrior tactic means when someone points out a mistake in something you did, rather than accepting it, going ahead and being even more aggressive that no, I did not do this, and if you say this again, I will hit you again. That is what China does. So China started its wolf warrior diplomacy, saying that no, we are not responsible, and in return, China declared Japanese diplomat as persona non grata. What is persona non grata? Persona non grata means you are unwelcomed in our country, you have to leave. You are unwelcomed in our country, you have to leave. So first Canada dismissed a Chinese diplomat because Canada said that you are spying on our lawmakers' family or threatening them. In return, China also did the same. China has also dismissed a Canadian diplomat and given her a few days to leave the country. Now, this is not the beginning of the ties. The beginning of the problem actually goes back to some years. In 2018, the Chinese telecom company Huawei, this was the beginning of the problem. In 2018, China and Canada were face to face over the telecom company Huawei. Now, what is the problem here? See, Huawei has been a very controversial company. It is one of the largest telecom manufacturers, telecom equipment manufacturers in the world. But there are allegations in US, in Canada, in India also. Everyone believes that Huawei actually steals people's information and gives it to Chinese government. So many governments have actually banned Huawei on many charges of espionage, many charges of corruption. Canada also in 2018 arrested a Huawei executive on charges of fraud. There were charges by Canadian government that a Huawei executive is committing a fraud in Canada, stealing information. He was arrested. He was kept in the prison in Canada for 3 years. He was only released in 2021. So from 2018 to 2021, the situation between the two countries was very bad. In that period, the two sides also discontinued trade in many sectors. For example, China suspended import of canola oil from Canada. They said that there are pests in the shipment, the quality is not that great. The ban was uplifted because of the Ukraine-Russia war, the oil prices were increasing. But for a long time, China said that we will not import Canada oil or canola oil from Canada because it has pests. Now something very interesting happened in the recent G20. Mr. Black Hardcoats, let me answer your question because you have been asking it many times. Simran Bhulchandani is not here in the chat. If she would have been here, she would have responded. So let me answer this question for you since she's not responding. Okay, let's go ahead then. You're welcome. So what happened in the latest G20? That is also something that came in the news. So in the latest G20 summit, the G20 summit that happened in Indonesia, what happened was in the G20 summit, as you know, a lot of these world leaders came together and they were talking to each other. So what happened was, in the latest G20 summit in Indonesia, the Canadian Prime Minister, that is Justin Trudeau, was talking to Xi Jinping. Now listen to this very carefully, this is very interesting. So what happened was, the Canadian Prime Minister and Xi Jinping, they were talking in the G20 summit. Now, when they were talking in the G20 summit, what happened was, there was a camera the camera actually caught their conversation. Now, what was the conversation? Please listen to this. The talk was, Xi Jinping was actually scolding the Prime Minister of Canada. Why? Xi Jinping was telling, and this is all on camera, Xi Jinping was telling the Canadian Prime Minister that we are discussing, we are negotiating a certain matter, and you are leaking it all to the press. Why are you leaking this? Apparently at that point of time, Canada and China were negotiating an agreement about the release of these executives, and Xi Jinping started scolding the Canadian Prime Minister, literally scolding like a kid, that why are you leaking all these talks to the media when this is a secret talk. What did Canada Prime Minister say? And this is all on camera. The Canadian Prime Minister said that no, we are a liberal country, we are a transparent democracy, we tell everything to the press, we don't hide anything from the press. This was the response of Canadian Prime Minister. And then Xi Jinping moved away, he stopped talking to him, and he said a Chinese word. I don't remember the Chinese word. He just said a Chinese word and then he started moving away. That Chinese word, if you translate that to English, that meaning is naive. Xi Jinping said a Chinese word before moving away from Canadian Prime Minister. Whatever was the Chinese word, if you translate that into English, that will be naive. This is what happened at the G20 summit. Just imagine two heads of big nations talking to each other, one scolding the other, and then other one defending and then saying, you are so naive, I'm just going away, I will not talk to you. This is how Canada and China are right now. That they are almost on not talking terms, they are dismissing each other's diplomats, because again, the two sides do not trust each other. Now, if you actually see, India also, although we have not banned Huawei completely, but India also has been raising concerns about Chinese companies like Huawei. When India, a few months back, was conducting the 5G trials. Now, remember, when you conduct trials for 5G or any new technology, you require new equipment that is made to handle 5G speed. So around the world at that point of time, Huawei was the only company that was making these telecom equipments where you can test 5G. But even then India said, no, we will not use Huawei equipments. In the 5G trials, India announced that Huawei equipment will not be used, ZTE equipment will not be used. Why? Because they steal data and they give it to the Chinese government. So India has not banned the companies, but as you can see in the news report, they don't get a lot of contracts from the government of India now. So these companies have been reducing their workforce in India. And this is the same case with most of the countries. US, Canada, all of them have either banned Huawei and ZTE, or if they have not banned it, they have at least stopped giving them contracts. Now, I see, if you are young people today in your 20s, you might not have heard about Huawei. Basically, if you remember, a few years back, we used to have these internet dongles. Do you remember that? Kind of a pen drive, you insert it into a laptop and you insert a SIM card into it, and that is how you could use your broadband. So we used to have these dongles, we call them internet dongles or whatever you want to call them. Huawei used to manufacture those dongles. Huawei also has mobile phones. So I had a mobile phone of Huawei very long time back. So Huawei used to have those small mobile phones, not the smartphone ones. They used to have those mobile phones. So they don't make a lot of those equipment which are used by common personal people. Rather, what they do is they make big industrial size telecom equipments. So big ISPs, etc. They will use huge routers, switches made by Huawei. So that is how Huawei and ZTE become famous. Okay. Let me see if there are a few comments other than inquiring for each other's presence. If there are a few comments, I'll take those up and then we'll go ahead. Tejas saying how Canada law affects China regarding Uyghurs. No. So Canada did not pass a law. Canada just made a comment. It was a resolution that China is not keeping or is not behaving well with their Uyghurs. It doesn't really impact China in any way. But again, when you are such a powerful country as China is, you don't want anyone to speak against you. So China just became angry. Nothing would really change with China. Sandeep Meena is saying increasing Chinese influence. Now India's long proven friend is coming close with China. I think you mean Russia, right? Okay, the question is hidden. I'll just go up. Yeah. So now India's long proven friend, that is Russia, is coming close to China and China's military aggressiveness. What are government of India's plan to enforce to counter these things? See, the point is, the reality of that fact is right now Russia needs China more than they need India. So it's very obvious that Russia would want to come too close to China. They are in a much stronger relationship as they are with India because Russia, China have much more in common in terms of trade as compared to India. Now, what is India doing about it? As you know, India also is not just lying idle. We are also forming as many partnerships as possible. Also, it's not that we have ended our relationship with Russia. We still are close friends with Russia. But again, we are also trying to have as many participation as many groups as possible, be it Quad, the I2, U2, etc. It's not that we can directly interfere between Russia and China, but we can be prepared on our own, and that is what we are doing. Govardhanam has a question. If one CM lost the floor test, then the new CM is called to form the government. If that CM also loses the majority, the other CM is called. In this, how many ways new CM can be formed without new election? There is no such rule or there is no such limit that this is how many times a government creation can be attempted. The governor would try to form the government as many times as possible. The reason being, conducting elections is a very, very, very expensive exercise. So it is tried that we can avoid elections as much as possible before 5 years. But if it's not possible, we will conduct elections. Pujata is saying, what did Xi Jinping mean by naive? He meant naive by naive. What do you mean when you say naive? You mean naive only. Naive means basically a person who is so innocent that he doesn't even understand how the world works. That is how naive is. So, for example, let me give you an example. In childhood, all of you would have heard this story that honesty is the best policy, right? All of you would have repeated this time and time again, right? Honesty is the best policy, honesty is the best policy, honesty is the best policy. Now tell me this, how many of you can tell me today that I have never told a lie in my life? Can any one of you tell me this? Can any one of you say, I have never told a lie in my life? Why? Because I know honesty is the best policy. No, right? All of you at some point of time, be it small or be it big, would have lied, right? If you would have been naive, you would have said all your life, no, honesty is the best policy, so I will abide by that. I will be honest no matter what. But you don't do that because you're not naive. So that is what naive is. Okay, that is the only example I had. Let's go ahead then. The next article is about something called LIBOR, L-I-B-O-R. This stands for London Interbank Offered Rate. Let me just write it here. London Interbank Offered Rate. Now, what exactly is LIBOR and how does it work? So basically, in simple terms, this is the interest rate using which the banks around the world take money from each other, borrow money from each other. LIBOR, L-I-B-O-R, is the interest rate at which the banks usually borrow money from each other over a small period of time. Okay. Now, this LIBOR, as you actually know, this keeps on changing every business day. So what happens is, how LIBOR is decided is very interesting. So some big banks around the world, listen to this very carefully, some big banks around the world are in the board of this LIBOR organization. What happens is, these big banks every single day in the morning, they give their own opinion what should be the rate of interest. All that opinion is taken and it is given to financial data company Thomson Reuters. They will then make an average of it. So an average is calculated kind of by removing the extreme entries. They take the average of it and that becomes a LIBOR. So basically that is how it is calculated. LIBOR is not calculated by any single bank or any single country. Major banks around the world, many of them, they give input. There's an average that has to be found. For example, let's say SBI is a part of it. I'll give you an example. Let's say SBI, HDFC, PNB, ICICI. Let's assume these four are in the panel of LIBOR. Just an example. SBI submits that we think the rate should be 5% today. HDFC says that no, we think rate should be 4% today. PNB says we think rate should be 4.5% today. ICICI says rate should be 3% today. So then what you do is you do the average kind of it, and that becomes a LIBOR rate for every day. So that is a LIBOR rate, decided every day by those banks who are part of the LIBOR panel. They are some of the big banks in the world. They are the ones who submit the rate, and that average becomes the LIBOR rate for the day. Now the problem here is, and why is it in the news? There were some scandals that came out earlier, a few years back. The scandals were that these banks were artificially collaborating with each other and lowering the rate of interest. This was a problem here, that all these different types of banks were talking to each other on the phone and suggesting that, okay, tomorrow let's give a very low number so that the average is low, so that we can borrow money from each other in a very easy manner. So in simple terms, the LIBOR rate was being fixed artificially. This is what RBI does not like, and RBI has now suggested Indian banks that you have to move away from this system. You have to move away from the LIBOR system. That is what the RBI has told the Indian banks. So what is the alternative? If it is not LIBOR, then how will the banks from each other borrow money? There is an alternative which is called SOFR. SOFR means Secured Overnight Financing Rate. This will be a rate that will be used in place of LIBOR. That will be a rate that would actually be used from banks to take money from each other. How will that be calculated? This will be on an average the repo rates that are used around the world. So you will take RBI's current repo rate, you take American Federal Reserve repo rate, you take repo rate of major countries around the world, and then you average it out. You will call that the Secured Overnight Financing Rate. That is SOFR. This will be used to replace LIBOR. This is what the this is what the RBI wants Indian banks to do. They do not want to follow the LIBOR system. Why? Because a LIBOR system is decided, or LIBOR rate is decided as an average of multiple banks. It can be artificially lowered. It was lowered earlier. That led to a lot of scam. So now RBI doesn't want banks to use LIBOR. Rather, they want them to use something called SOFR, Secured Overnight Financing Rate. This is the rate of interest using which the banks can borrow money from each other. How will that be decided? This will be on an average the repo rate, that the average of the repo rate that the banks use around the entire world. Now, this LIBOR is actually used by banks for a lot of things. To buy municipal bonds from each other. LIBOR is also used for private student loans. All these things, while being decided as a policy matter, they use the LIBOR interest rate. On the interest rate of LIBOR, all these things were offered, especially in the US and the European markets. These LIBOR rates are decided by 18 global banks participating in this process. There were 18 global banks that used to give their own rate of interest, what they thought should be the rate of interest. Every day before 11 a.m., the average was found out. That became the LIBOR, LIBOR. There was a scandal on LIBOR earlier, because of which countries around the world had decided to ditch this. The scandal was in 2007-8, when there was manipulation of the LIBOR rate. There was investigation that some banks participating in the LIBOR rate had artificially tried to bring down the LIBOR rate so that it becomes easier for them to borrow money from each other when they did not have enough money. In the US, there were some banks that were even given a penalty. Banks such as the Barclays, Deutsche Bank, Royal Bank of Scotland, UBS, all of them had to give a penalty because they were collaborating to bring down the LIBOR rate before submitting. They used to talk to each other. That is how the countries around the world, including RBI, have decided that we want to skip the LIBOR rate and move to something else. This was our second article this was the last article for the day from the mains examination point of view. Before we go to prelims one, let me quickly take up a few comments. Benazir, no. How LIBOR will be the same? LIBOR is obviously different. LIBOR was different banks used to give their own input that we think 5% should be the rate, we think 7% should be the rate, and then they used to take an average of it. Kapil is saying RBI get money from finance ministry? No. Why would RBI take money from finance ministry? No. RBI doesn't take money from the government. On the contrary, RBI gives money to the government. No, sorry, there were no Indian banks in the 18 that decided the LIBOR rate. Aditi is saying, why banks borrow from each other? So, see, when you deposit money in the bank, every bank doesn't keep a lot of cash. For example, when you submit money in the banks have to invest that to make sure that they also earn an interest from there. So what the banks do, if they have a cash crunch, they don't have cash right now, and some big customer comes in to withdraw 100 crore rupees, you don't have that much cash, so you borrow for 1 or 2 days from the other bank and then you give it back. So that is how they usually borrow from each other for some small amount of time. Because they don't have that much cash, they have invested all their cash already. Perfect. Let's move on then. 2 more articles to go, especially from the prelims examination point of view. First, the cabinet has given approval to fertilizer subsidy of over 1 lakh crore for the upcoming kharif season. This news is not really big because this is a very common kind of a news. For Rabi season also, the cabinet gives approval of the subsidy. Then again for the kharif season, they give approval for the subsidy. The subsidy that they have approved for the kharif season will be over 1 lakh crore rupees. The central government expects that the fertilizer subsidy bill this year would be about 2.25 lakh crore. As you can see, this is by far one of the biggest expenditures of the government. That is the fertilizer subsidy. Out of this, the 1,08,000 or 1.808 lakh crore subsidy, 38,000 will go to phosphatic and potassic fertilizers, while 70,000 will be for urea subsidy. Just to give you an idea how much subsidy the government gives, urea, for example, right now is sold in the market at rupees 276 per bag. That is about 2,200 rupees lower than the market price. So in the market price, the urea bag may be close to 2,400 rupees, but the farmer can get it at only 276 rupees. The rest of it, the government of India pays. Similarly, the diammonium phosphate market price is 4,000 rupees. Government gives to the farmers at 1,350 rupees. That is high. That is why we have huge bills on the fertilizer subsidy. This is one of the biggest expenses of the government. As you know, amongst the fertilizers, that is NPK, what should be the ideal ratio? The ideal ratio should be 4:2:1. NPK, that is nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium. That ratio should be 4:2:1 in the soil. But the problem here is because in India, farmers get so much subsidy on urea, because urea becomes so cheap for them. When something becomes cheap for you, you use it in very large quantity. In Indian soils, nitrogen is much more than what is required. To bring that down, the government of India started something called the nutrient-based subsidy scheme. That is, subsidy will be given on the basis of how much nutrient, how much nitrogen, phosphorus or potassium there is in the fertilizer. There will not be overall subsidy. Subsidy will be on the basis of how much nutrition or how much nutrients do we have in the fertilizer. The idea of the scheme is to bring back the ratio to 4:2:1. This scheme is being implemented by Department of Fertilizers under Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers. Do remember this? Again, this is a government initiative to force the farmers to reduce the use of urea when it is not required. This rate of nutrient subsidy, how much nutrient subsidy will be given, is decided by the government of India every single year. Like this is what was the rate last year. Last financial year, for every kg of nitrogen, about 98 rupees subsidy was given. Then for phosphorus, potash, sulfur, every single year the government decides based on the nutrients how much subsidy has to be given. The next last article that we have is a sad and unfortunate news coming in from the UN. The UN has said that in the next 5 years, most probably there is a 66% chance that the world will go above the 1.5 degrees Celsius climate change goal that we have made. So there is a 66% chance that this level of 1.5 degrees that we have set for ourselves, we will breach that. This is the new prediction from UN. It is bad news. Why? Because last year the probability was 50%. That 50% in the next 5 years we will breach the mark. Now the probability has become 66% that we will breach this mark. Every single year the probability is increasing. This has also got to do because of the 1.5, also got to do because the El Nino this year. El Nino also is increasing the average temperature, the average heat around the world. This is also why the world is getting heated at a much, much faster pace. No one is in any doubt that the world at some point of time will breach the 1.5 degrees Celsius mark, but how soon will we get there? That is the only question. So now the probability is in the next 5 years, we will reach that mark, 66% chance. This is a graph which I wanted to show you, which shows you how the average temperature around the world has been increasing. This is the graph of average maximum temperature and the graph of average minimum temperature. In 2021, the average maximum temperature was 31.05. This has all been increasing in the last century. So as you can see, since the last century, there has all been a high increase here. This is why the government of India and the nations around the world have to work together to make sure that although we will reach 1.5 degree, but we do not go ahead. Please remember one more thing. Let's assume if today we cut down all our emissions, please understand this. Let's say if today we cut down on all our pollution, all our emissions, that doesn't mean that from tomorrow something will change. Please remember, this carbon dioxide that is emitted, it remains in the atmosphere for many, many, many decades. So for example, if today you start cutting down on your emissions, you might see a drop in the global temperature after 40, 50 years. So whatever we do today will be for the next generation, not for this generation. Please remember that. The impact of climate change will not be seen today from the activities that we are doing right now. It will be for the next generation to see. There is an organization called the IPCC that prepares most of these reports. The IPCC was established in 1988 by UN and the World Meteorological Organization. So it is UNEP and the World Meteorological Organization that have come together to make IPCC. IPCC is the research agency that interprets all these climate change related reports, and then they give advice to the government on how the government should tackle the problem of climate change. This is what the IPCC does. Remember, IPCC is Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Today's homework for you is search about IPCC and tell me when did they won the Nobel Prize and for what exactly. They won the Nobel Prize, search about why they won the Nobel Prize and for what reason and when exactly. That is the IPCC. This is the end of today's discussion. There are a couple of practice questions that you have here. Try and write answers to these questions. You can use the answer writing portal link given in the description of the video to post your answers there, and you can see each other's feedback. You can also see how the others are writing the answers so that you can actually learn from that. That brings me to the end of the session. Thank you so much for joining in. Do join us tomorrow as well, 10 a.m. for the Hindu Newspaper Analysis. Have a good day ahead. Bye-bye. Jai Hind.